Hey, welcome. Today we're going to talk about influence, but not the flashy, here today, gone tomorrow kind. We're talking about the real stuff. Influence you can actually build, something that lasts. So let's just get right into it.
You know the drill, right? Some video just explodes, a post goes completely viral, and everyone's talking about it. But then, what happens a week later? Poof, it's gone. It's like it never even happened. And that's the big headache for so many creators and marketers, that attention just vanishes. So the real question is, how do you get off that roller coaster? How do you go from these random spikes of hype to something that actually sticks around?
And this right here, this quote really nails the whole idea. The game isn't about chasing those lightning-in-a-bottle viral moments anymore. It's a total mindset shift. The new goal is to build a predictable rhythm, something your audience can actually rely on and look forward to, time and time again.
And that chase for viral hits? Well, we call that the virality trap. And it's a trap for a reason. It's exhausting, it's totally unpredictable, and honestly, it just leads to burnout. But even worse, it teaches your audience to only care about the big, flashy explosions. They show up for the fireworks, but they don't stick around for the steady, warm flame. We have to build something better than that.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we build that steady flame? Well, we stop chasing moments and we start building a loop. And not just any loop. We're talking about a behavioral loop that's designed specifically for creating genuine, lasting influence.
So, what's the psychology behind all this? It's actually super simple and kind of surprising. Our brains don't really crave what's new, they crave predictable satisfaction. Think about it. We are hardwired to repeat stuff that gives us a reliable reward. And that one simple idea, that's the foundation for this whole system.
Now, a lot of you have probably heard of the classic habit loop, right? It's cue, routine, reward. Simple. But for what we're trying to do here, for building influence, we need to give it a major upgrade. So we're swapping cue for a much more active hook. We're turning a generic reward into a feeling of personal ownership. And this is the big one. We're replacing a functional routine with something way more powerful, emotion.
So why that huge switch from routine to emotion? Well, think about it. In creative fields, in building a community, a feeling is so much more powerful than just a simple action. An emotional connection, that's what's sticky. That's what makes an experience unforgettable. It's what makes people want to share what you're doing, and it's basically the glue that holds a community together. You forget an action, but you remember how something made you feel.
All right, that's enough theory. Let's get down to brass tacks. How does this thing actually work in the real world? It all comes together in a really clear 4-step rhythm that you can literally start using today. This is the engine that makes the whole influence loop run.
And here it is, the whole cycle in 4 steps. First, you hook attention. Second, you reward emotion. Third, you reinforce ownership. And fourth, and this is so important, you repeat with rhythm. Okay, let's break each of these down so you know exactly what they mean.
Okay, step 1, the hook. This is your signal. It's your call out. It has to be something consistent, something recognizable, kind of like raising a familiar flag that tells your audience, hey, over here, this is for you. It could be a specific phrase you always use or a certain visual style. Whatever it is, the hook creates this instant feeling of familiarity. It lets people know they're in the right place.
All right, once you've hooked their attention, you've got to deliver the goods, the payoff. And that payoff has to be emotional. It could be an aha moment of insight, a good laugh, or just that feeling of being understood. But here's the secret sauce. You have to make it a variable reward. Just like a slot machine, if the payoff is slightly different each time, it keeps our brains completely engaged and prevents the whole thing from getting boring or predictable.
Step 3 is where the magic really happens. This is where you turn someone who's just watching into someone who feels like they're a part of it all. Reinforcing ownership is all about making your audience feel seen, heard, and valued. Responding to their comments, creating inside jokes, building that sense of belonging. It makes the whole interaction feel personal, and it makes them feel important. And finally, step 4. And look, none of the first 3 steps matter without this one. Rhythm. You have to repeat the cycle consistently, over and over. That repetition is what builds this whole loop into a trusted habit for your audience. But, and this is a big but, it's not about being a robot. The source material puts it perfectly. Repetition is rhythm. Variation is life. The framework stays the same, but the content inside it always feels fresh.
So now that we've got the 4-step loop down, let's talk about why it's so ridiculously powerful, even if you don't have a giant audience. And this leads us to a really counterintuitive concept, the power of micro-influence.
Man, I love this quote. It just completely flips the old school idea of influence on its head. The goal is not just to rack up a massive number of followers who don't really care. The real goal is to build momentum with a core group of people who are genuinely, deeply engaged.
Okay, just let this number sink in for a second. 50. Just 50 people who consistently show up, who comment, who share, who are truly invested, can be way more valuable than 5,000 people who just passively scroll by. And why is that? It's because the algorithms are watching.
And you can see that value right here on this chart. The platforms we use are literally built to reward repeated interactions. So when a small, loyal group engages with your stuff over and over, it sends a massive signal of high relevance to the algorithm. And what does the algorithm do? It starts pushing your content out to more and more people. It's a powerful feedback loop.
And this has a name. It's called the compounding follower effect. Basically, your small, dedicated audience acts like a force multiplier. Their consistent engagement creates this visibility loop that grows your reach organically. You don't even have to pay for it. So the big takeaway here is really simple. Depth creates visibility.
So let's pull all these threads together. The huge shift in thinking we've been talking about this whole time is to stop seeing influence as some kind of random accident or lucky break. We need to start recognizing it for what it actually is, a system that you can deliberately build.
And that is the real power of this behavioral loop. It gets you out of the casino, out of the virality trap where you're just gambling on luck. And instead, it puts you in control of a reliable, predictable system. A system that doesn't just grab attention for a fleeting moment, but actually earns trust and builds loyalty for the long haul.
So when it all comes down to it, it's about this one powerful idea. Building real influence isn't magic. It's not some mysterious art. It's mathematics. It's a science. It's about understanding human psychology and applying a framework. And now, you have the equation.
So I'm going to leave you with this question, because this isn't just some interesting theory, it's a blueprint for you to use. So think about it. What's the hook, the emotion, the sense of ownership you can provide? What is the consistent, valuable rhythm that you are going to create for your audience? Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So, if you've been following along, you know we've talked about capturing attention, that initial hook, almost like a kind of psychomaths, that calculation to just cut through all the noise.
Exactly. But getting that first glance is one thing. Keeping that attention, turning it into real, sustained loyalty. That's the long game. So today we're really digging into what's called the behavioral loop of influence.
Okay, the behavioral loop of influence.
Yeah, it's basically the system, the cycle that determines if that initial buzz you generate just fizzles out or if it stabilizes or maybe even starts to grow exponentially.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The core idea here, it seems, pretty simple, but also quite powerful. It's that human behavior fundamentally is about repetition. We're looking for a reward. And these sophisticated campaigns, they're not really chasing novelty all the time. They're building a craving for, predictable satisfaction. Is that right?
That's exactly it. That's our mission today. We're looking at the specific mechanics, the nuts and bolts, these advanced influence operations used to sort of lock in audience behavior. We need to unpack how consistency, maybe surprisingly, becomes the most powerful kind of virality, how they structure rewards to keep motivation high. And this is really key, how repeated cues build this invisible thing we're calling the trust pathway.
Right. Okay, let's start right at the beginning then.
Right.
The absolute foundation of, any behavioral change.
Yeah.
Every action someone takes, right? Viewing a post, leaving a comment, sharing something, that's a stimulus.
Yep.
And if that stimulus gets reinforced consistently, the brain goes, okay, that was valuable, and it just naturally wants to repeat it.
That's straight out of Behavioral Science 101. We often talk about Charles Duhigg's habit formula.
Oh, yeah, the cue routine reward.
Exactly. That classic loop. It explains simple stuff like, your commute, grabbing that same coffee every morning. Really straightforward, repeatable actions.
But here's where it gets really interesting for what we're talking about.
Right.
Because that model, it kind of breaks down for dynamic content, doesn't it? For art, for influence campaigns.
It does.
The routine bit. That's the problem, isn't it? Creative work can't be purely routine. It has to feel fresh, engaging, otherwise people just tune out. So how do these big operations adapt that?
Well, they recognize the behavior they want isn't really a physical routine. It's more of an emotional action. So the modify loop, the one that's much more robust for this context, it goes hook, emotion, ownership.
Hook, Emotion, ownership. Okay,
Right.
so emotion replaces routine.
Precisely.
Instead of asking people to do the same predictable thing, you're actually trying to prompt a specific emotional response, like excitement or validation, or maybe even like frustration that makes them engage.
Exactly. The action is the emotional reaction. That's the core shift. And that reward piece, which we're calling ownership, that's absolutely essential. It's the psychological anchor, the stabilizer. It needs to feel powerful, really personal to keep the loop going. If the audience doesn't feel personally invested, like they genuinely own a piece of the outcome, well, the whole cycle just collapses.
And that ownership, it's not always about money, right?
Not at all.
For a loyal audience, maybe ownership is getting special access or status in the community or getting info early or just, getting acknowledged by the creator, validating their taste.
All of those. It makes the loop self-sustaining. So the practical takeaway here for you listening is really about building psychological familiarity, like consistently using a certain tone or a visual look, or even just a phrase that acts as that reliable hook.
Ah, so the brain learns, okay, this signal means a good emotional payoff is coming, and people come back without you having to constantly, nudge them.
You got it. You standardize the start of the experience, make it predictable, which then lets you deliver the actual novelty in the content without breaking that underlying loop.
Okay, so that sets the foundation. Now let's move from just forming the habit to the neuroscience of sustaining it. Because we know basic engagement, a like, a comment, that gives you a little dopamine hit. But the sources we looked at, they really highlight a flaw. Predictable rewards lead to habituation. And habituation just kills motivation over time.
It really does. If you know exactly what's coming and when, that dopamine response just tanks. It drops off really fast. And this brings us squarely into variable reinforcement theory. VRT. This is basically the engine behind sustained digital engagement. And frankly, addiction.
Yeah, we all kind of know the big examples, right? Slot machines, endlessly scrolling social media feeds. But for these advanced campaigns, how does VRT actually work technically? Is it just about being random?
Well, what's fascinating is it's not pure chaos. It's more like intermittent reinforcement, often on a schedule, but a variable one. Your brain stays hooked because it knows a reward is likely coming, but it doesn't know exactly when or even what kind of reward it will be. So the brain never fully adjusts. It never gets complacent. And that constant state of anticipation, that's what prevents people from just disengaging and scrolling past.
So the core idea is avoid static rewards.
Yeah.
You're deliberately injecting variation, maybe visual, maybe emotional, maybe contextual, into each piece of content, or even how you reply to comments, just to keep the audience guessing.
Yes. And a really key adaptation in modern influence is realizing you have to alternate not just the timing, but the type of reward, too. You can't just keep throwing, say, discounts or praise at people constantly. That starts feeling transactional or maybe a bit shallow. You actually risk burning out your audience.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So if these campaigns need to alternate reward types, what are we talking about? What are the main categories they rotate between for maximum VRT impact?
Okay, so there are basically 3 core types you need to cycle through because they tap into different internal motivations. First, there's the immediate monetary reward, discounts, actual commissions, hard value. This gives tangible proof.
Okay.
Second, the emotional reward. This is powerful. Inspiration, feeling understood, genuine humor, that feeling of connection. This hits intrinsic needs.
The feelings.
And third, which is highly addictive, is social recognition. This is about validation within the group, maybe getting elevated or shouted out by the creator. It addresses belonging, status.
I got you. Monetary, emotional, social. So you reward in waves.
Exactly.
Maybe 1 week, an action gets a monetary kickback. The next, maybe you focus VRT on rewarding the community with, exclusive recognition or early access to something.
Precisely. The repetition gives the loop its rhythm, keeps it going. But that variation, alternating the type of reward, that gives it life. It stops the motivation from just hitting a plateau and dying off.
It's like you're managing their emotional bank account, in a way.
That's a good way to put it. You prevent exhaustion by making sure the payoff always feels a little surprising, a little fresh, even if the behavior you're asking for is consistent.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly from just getting engagement to actually driving conversion. Because, engagement without action is, it's just entertainment, right? And trust, that's not built in one go. It comes from repeated, reliable recognition. This brings us to the trust pathway, this sort of invisible route from just seeing something to actually believing it enough to act.
Yeah, and this really takes behavioral conditioning up a notch. When your audience consistently sees the same tone, the same visual identity, the same core values, their brain does something subtle but really profound. It starts to switch off the active critical analysis, that little voice of skepticism, It starts accepting the signal as familiar, and familiar feels safe.
But hang on, isn't that just good branding? Like old school branding? What does the behavioral conditioning add here?
That's a fair question. Branding often aims for memory, for recall. The trust pathway aims for accelerated acceptance. Consistency builds what we call predictive trust. Those reliable cues let the brain establish safety much faster, which dramatically lowers the resistance to any call to action. The audience doesn't feel the need to reevaluate you every single time they see your content.
So that predictive safety means the campaign feels.
Yeah.
It's designed to feel familiar, but still fresh.
Exactly. That balance is critical.
Because an audience that's highly conditioned in that state of predictive trust, that's the highest converting state you can get. They basically skip the analysis and just move to action.
That's the goal. And the practical application here is rigorous. You have to standardize your signal, make it almost subconscious. That visual fingerprint, the emotional tone, it needs to be so tight that someone recognizes and trusts you in like under 3 seconds.
Wow. Okay.
Trust doesn't just help familiarity, it literally accelerates the entire conversion timeline.
Okay, moving towards efficiency now. Because the sources are really clear on this. The smart operations focus on reliability way more than just sheer reach.
Absolutely.
Like 50 truly loyal responders who act consistently are worth way more, financially and strategically, than 5,000 passive viewers who just scroll by once.
That's the fundamental logic driving so much of modern influence, especially with algorithms. The algorithms reward repeat interactions. The speed and depth of engagement matter exponentially more than just the width of that initial exposure. Momentum builds from depth, not width. It's what we call the compounding follower effect.
So depth equals visibility. If you have active responses, reposts, referrals, what campaigns often track as echometrics, you actually multiply your effective reach without spending more money.
Right.
Because the algorithm sees high relevance, high engagement, and it just boosts your organic visibility.
Which brings up a really important point. Why does actually acknowledging feedback matter so much? It seems time-consuming. It's about building reciprocal feedback. When you genuinely acknowledge engagement, replying with actual emotion, not just automated responses, addressing comments, maybe even using fan ideas, you massively multiply the perceived value of that initial action the audience took.
So it's the human touch amplifying the algorithm.
Precisely.
You invest time in the conversation, and that conversation ultimately equals conversion because you're turning passive viewers into, like, deeply loyal members of a community.
Exactly. The cost-benefit analysis, it always favors investing in that genuine connection. Always.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this all up. What does this full behavioral loop of influence framework actually look like now that we've unpacked it? You hook attention using familiarity. You reward the resulting emotion, but with variable payoff.
Yep, keep it fresh.
You reinforce their sense of ownership through personal investment.
Make it matter to them.
And then you just repeat the whole cycle consistently with rhythm.
That's the essence of it. And every time that cycle completes, you're building retention, you're deepening that predictive trust, and you're increasing income more predictably. The whole system becomes less reliant on luck, on catching lightning in a bottle, and much more about generating scientifically engineered predictable results.
So influence really isn't magic. It's more like mathematics applied through psychology. And hopefully you listening now have a much better handle on that core equation for sustained engagement.
Definitely. And we talked about how strategically alternating those reward types, monetary, emotional, social recognition, is so crucial for preventing burnout and keeping motivation high. So maybe connecting this to the bigger picture, think about how often traditional marketing just leans on one reward type, usually money, right? Discounts, points, whatever.
Yeah, true.
So here's a final thought to mull over. What kind of varied non-cash ownership could you start rewarding your most loyal audience with tomorrow? Something that drives that deeper non-transactional commitment.
Ooh, that's a really good question to end on. Something beyond just the usual transactional stuff. Okay, that wraps up our deep dive into the behavioral loop of influence. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.